Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Welcome back to Live from the Heartland. I'm Michael James here in Chicago. And those of you who listen regularly or view the show know that periodically I talk about El Paso and going down there. And when I first went to El Paso, probably in 2002, I had the honor of meeting this young fellow named David Romo. And recently I found some photographs of him when we went across to Juarez, and I sent them to him, and he sent me back, a little greeting, and then had a link to an article he did, which was basically about the sordid, backward, terrible history of barbed wire on the border. And I got a hold of him, and I said, "How about coming on the show?" And I had been very impressed with you, David, when we first met, and you had just come out with a book called "Ringside Seat to the Revolution," and it was like the Mexican Revolution viewed pretty much from up high on buildings on the El Paso side of the Rio Grande. And it was Cinco Puntos Press. Our friends there put out the book. It's really got a lot of great pictures and a lot of information. But you didn't leave it at that. You've been doing more. And you just had an article that showed up in the Washington Post. How did that come to be? And what's the article called? And what's it about?
Yeah, it's the first time I write for the Washington Post. I just got a letter from the editor of Metropolis, Aaron Weiner, and he just invited me to submit something. So just recently, I was going through one of the neighborhoods in El Paso, and a friend of mine saw all the barbed wire that Governor Abbott has put up just in the last few months. And this friend of mine said, "Man, this feels like Normandy, right? This is a war zone now. It's not our city anymore." And when she said that, I said, "Okay, Normandy, yeah, that's one of the historical connections that I see, but there's so much more to it." And I just pitched this article to the Washington Post, and I don't know if you want me to draw you point by point, but yeah, they liked the idea, and it just came out last week. Very current.
What is the actual title of the article?
It's The Long Ugly History of Barbed Wire on the U.S. Mexico border.
Yeah, and you go way back. I mean, I've been going to El Paso now on a regular basis since 2002, and it's pretty sad to me to see that wall that as you drive west toward New Mexico or the other way, they got these great big steel girders. And I don't know, I'm sure people still get over them with ladders and things like that, but it's really just not a very good feeling it gives one about being an American and our relationships with other people in other countries. And so you're down there and you see it all the time. So it's not just those big steel walls that are built, but now they've got along the river, they've got all kind of barbed wire. And in your article, you make connections to Nazi Germany, to other places in the world. Basically, why don't you fill us in on how barbed wire has been used to separate people, keep people enclosed, to just do terrible things?
Well, barbed wire was invented to prevent movement, but originally it was to prevent movement of animals, cattle. So
it is in Illinois, I understand.
In Illinois, that's correct. It's a farmer by the name of Joseph Glidden. Obtained the first patent in 1874, and yeah, they were trying to keep cattle in their place, but it had a lot of repercussions because it was a very effective way of fragmenting Native American lands. Native Americans, by the way, called it the Devil's Rope because it basically destroyed their traditional hunting grounds. Ranchers, they would snip the barbed wire so that their cattle could roam freely. You have Mexican American villagers in New Mexico that would also snip the barbed wire of these Anglo land speculators that were taking away their communal lands. So from the very beginning, it had a very negative connotation. Later, it's used to create what at that time people called concentration camps. So I actually didn't write about the connection of Nazi Germany. When you think of barbed wire in its ugliest uses, you think of no man's land in World War I, or you think of course, the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. And I didn't even go that far because from the very beginning, the first time that barbed wire is being used as part of the border, at least there were calls for it, was back in 1904. And so back then, the so-called illegal immigrants were not the Mexicans, because Mexicans crossed back and forth freely. It was the Chinese immigrants. So the 1882 Chinese exclusion law, that's the first time that a group is excluded from the United States based on their nationality or ethnicity. So a lot of the Chinese, in order to circumvent the surveillance in the Pacific coast, they would come down through Mexico. And today, history is repeating itself.
It sure is.
There is a lot of Chinese migration that is going through Mexico for the very same reasons. So I talk about how in 1904, there really hadn't been any calls to use barbed wire in the border, but it had already been used in places like Cuba and like the Philippines and South Africa. So the three major empires that were fighting all these colonial wars at the turn of the 20th century were Spain in Cuba during the Cuban Revolution. You had Jose Marti, who was there. And so in order for them to put down that revolution, they basically, the Spanish Empire basically put everybody in a concentration camp, surrounded by barbed wire. And we don't know the exact numbers. I quoted a conservative estimate of 60,000, mostly women and children and the elderly, died in these concentration camps. The United States criticized that, but very soon, like within like a handful of years, they were using it in the Philippines. And the brutal repression of Aguinaldo's revolt and the people of the Philippines rebelling. So they did the same thing that the Spaniards had done in Spain. And the estimates are about 11,000 people that died in those concentration camps. And pretty much at the same time, and most people, I think, erroneously believe that the first concentration camps were by the British in South Africa during the Boer War. And about 30,000 people died in their concentration camps. And the majority also were women and children. So that's part of kind of the underground, unknown history of barbed wire. It wasn't until 1916 that you get a National Guardsman, Vanderbilt from New York. He leaves his mansion on Fifth Avenue. Is the great grandson of the Gilded Age of Vanderbilt, right? One of the kings of the railroad empire, and he proposes a 2,000-mile fence, not only a barbed wire fence, but a high voltage barbed wire fence. So he wants to just electrocute the heck out of the, as we were called back then, the greasers, right? That was the racist term that they used for Mexicans at that time, and Mexican Americans. And so while I was doing research for this article, I myself hadn't heard about the even more brutal history of high voltage electrified barbed wire fences. So this guy got his idea from the first barrier between, at that time it was between the Netherlands and Belgium. And it was one of these German fences that was electrified by 2,000 volts. So about 3,000 people get killed trying to cross back and forth. And we're talking about World War I, not World War II. And so the Americans are looking at what's going on over there and saying, hey, why don't we bring it down to the border? So, I mean, I go into a whole bunch of different examples of this. But at the end of the day, at the end of my article, I said, well, remember when Trump, he wanted to put some alligators in a moat. I don't know if you recall that, right?
Yeah.
It's the crazy idea. And then the other idea is like, why don't we electrify the fence? And I said, well, Trump, if he thought he was coming up with something new, he was like a century too late, right? People had already thought those crazy ideas back then.
Well, David, didn't they have alligators in El Paso in a couple pond in a park?
In a pond, but not a. Yeah, the Mexican American community knows it as La Plaza de los Lagartos, Alligator Plaza, because there used to be a fountain there with some alligators that go back to the 1890s. They replaced them, of course, but back in the 1890s, there was a someone from Florida gave a gift to the city of these tiny little alligators in a cigar box, and the city leaders didn't know what to do with them, so they put them in the middle of a fountain in the downtown plaza, and that became known as Alligator Plaza. But they were not as crazy as what Trump wanted to do, was to put them in a boat so that they could, eat up immigrants.
Well, David Romo, talk a little bit more about today and the kind of measures that this pretty right-wing governor you have down there in Texas. Although I think you're living in New Mexico, right?
I'm right in the corner. You see El Paso, you can just go like 3 miles, not even 3 miles from downtown. And there's that corner there that has it's called Monument Marker number 1. So you have New Mexico and you have Texas and you have the state of Chihuahua, and you can literally like step and be in all 3 states almost at the same time.
I actually was there once with one of the guys from Basketball in the Barrio, and he told me to go over the stones. The next thing I know, the border guards were there.
Oh yeah,
They got me. They were going to take me back, but it all worked out okay. But anyhow, let me get back to the topic at hand. Share a little bit about the extent of the barricades that have been built along the Texas border by the governor, Abbott, and a little bit about the general situation that you're seeing on the border these days.
Yeah. So by the way, that place that you went to when you were down here for basketball in the barrio, now you can't get to it because there's a private wall that was built by these crazy extremists under the direction of what's his name, Steve Bannon. Remember, he got in trouble for committing fraud. It was that whole group. So now there's a fence that you can't even walk to that place anymore. And that to me, that was part of how these fences, these wars that are being fought by people in Washington end up affecting our daily life. Because I mean, that was part of when people like yourself and others would come, I would always take them there. I thought that was just like the greatest spot. And now, I used to ride my bike there. So the fence has totally encroached upon our daily lives. So it's not only affecting immigrants, but it's affecting all of us. I mean, it is so militarized down here. So yeah, I live far away from the river. I'll go jogging and I'll have helicopters kind of hovering over me, trying to figure out if I'm running because, I'm a migrant or what, right? So there's the sense that we are an occupied zone. So just, I think, if not today, just in the last couple of days, there's going to be a decision for the Texas police force, to be able to stop people and declare it a crime. What used to be a federal civil infraction is now going to be a Texas, I believe, a felony, if I'm not mistaken. Just the simple act of crossing the border, right? There's been all these skirmishes between, at one point, like there were a large number of people that were being pushed back towards the barbed wire by the Texas National Guardsmen. And there were a lot of injuries. And I think in a few cases, the Border Patrol intervened and snipped some of that wire to help out some of these immigrants that had been injured. And we're talking about deep injuries, in their back. This is racer wire. It's concertina wire that was created during World War I. So there's all kinds of, it reminds me of these fence wars that I talk about, right? So there's all kinds of chaos. But the worst thing is that this place has been uglified. I mean, this place just feels like occupied America to us. There's a zone which is a kind of, in my feeling, a no man's land. But it's been so normalized that some people don't even notice it. That's the price we have to pay. And the truth is that most of the people, most fronterizos, are already seeing, whether we have whether we've been here for generations or not, we're seen as foreigners in our own land by these politicians in Washington. So I don't think they really care if if this sense of occupation affects our communities as well.
Last week on my show, I had Congressman Chuy Garcia, and
Mhm.
who originally came out of Durango, and he was basically talking about how they're talking about making a deal on the uh, around Ukraine and around Israel, and trying to get some kind of changes on the border, and that the Latino caucus in the House is not at the table. They're not even being consulted.
Oh
Uh,
man.
and it's so I think that's got to come to light a little bit more. But what's the general feeling? You said some people kind of become immune to the situation, but how do other people see it? Whether it's Latinos or Mexicans, or whether it's you know whites or blacks, how do people down there see what's going on, and do they feel a threat? Um, I was down there this summer, and a lot of people seem concerned about it and is sympathetic to the situation, but I don't know where it's all at. And obviously it's going to have a lot of implications and ramifications in the uh, November 2024 election.
Yeah. Uh so there was this crisis in December where little I mean thousands of immigrants, mostly from Venezuela, Colombia, Nicaragua, they came and everybody was unprepared. The city didn't have any shelters. And I remember La Sociedad Civil, civil society, just kind of took it upon themselves. And you saw hundreds of El Pasoans just show up with food and blankets and, tamales, and because people were going to freeze. I mean, it was below freezing. And these are people from South America, right? From Colombia, that aren't used to those kind of freezing weather. And I just remember feeling, I volunteered in one of the shelters, Sacred Heart Church, which is right in the middle of Segundo Barrio, which is known as the Ellis Island of the border. And I just remember seeing hundreds of volunteers, just serving the immigrants, right? Serving
Yeah,
pizzas. And,
that was my sense, that there was a good vibe around it at some point.
right. Um, and then it just kept on getting more and more politicized. I mean, I just see us a, uh, as being just pawns to these politicians. They're just playing with people's lives, and yeah, of course, you get Abbott coming in and shipping people from El Paso, and the local mayor wanting not to declare it a federal emergency case, because once you do that, then you have Abbott bringing in the National Guards, and that's when they bring in the concertina wire. So these politicians don't give a crap. They just want to use people to make their own political points and to drive wedges between people. And unfortunately, in some cases, it works. I mean, Abbott, in his cruel and vicious way, was brilliant to bus people from El Paso and other places to
To
cities.
Chicago.
Right.
We're dealing with it big time up here. I mean, it's a serious issue now.
Yeah. And these guys are, they have their think tanks churning ideas for them on how to make things as ugly as possible. So now you have Trump calling immigrants all sorts of things, that they're going to poison the blood of the nation. And yeah, I'm a scholar. I read Mein Kampf in the original in German, and he's using those same words. And I believe it when I hear these when I read these stories about how Trump Mein Kampf, Hitler's book, on his nightstand, right before he became president, because he's repeating those phrases almost word by word.
Do you see any shift in the electorate in Texas? I mean, I've been hearing for 20 some odd years that it was going to shift to blue, and but Beto didn't pull it off against Abbott, although he came close when he ran for Senate. Do you see any good signs down there politically?
I mean, El Paso has always been to the left of almost all of Texas. Most of the border has been has been a Democratic section of Texas. South Texas, you have people that are, especially among these conservative Republican, the Latino vote, that is shifting more and more towards the Republicans, and I just see that as just really sad. I mean, when people can convince you to forget your own history and to take the sides of the colonizers, that kind of mental colonization is a huge victory for the other side, right? So that's how I see them. I see a lot of these Mexican Americans that have taken the side of people that oppress their own communities. And unfortunately, I mean, what I'm reading is the same thing you're reading. It's happening even among the African American community. And to me, uh, that's the worst forms of colonization. That's how
Yeah,
I
I
see
don't
it.
know if it'll hold. We'll see. I'm an optimistic kind of a dude in a lot of ways. Dave, we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to invite you back on the show. Tell me the name of your band, and then next time you come on, let's talk music.
All right. Yeah, the name of my band is Los Liminals. So to be liminal means to be an in-between person, right? To be neither here nor there and simultaneously from both sides.
All right. Well, it's great talking to you. I'm so glad we're back in touch.